multipliers on the AfCFTA, providing relevant information and support to your respective members. Our mandate at ITC is to connect micro, small, and medium enterprises in developing countries to international markets. In 2021, we launched our One Trade Africa program to specifically empower and enable African MSMEs, women and youth entrepreneurs to access lucrative business opportunities created by the AfCFTA. In May last year, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the AfCFTA Secretariat. This marked our joint commitment to cooperate to ensure that Africa's business community is empowered to benefit from the new opportunities made possible by the AfCFTA. 90% of African businesses are small and medium enterprises, of which 60% operate 55 African countries, offers an unparalleled opportunity for these enterprises. Indeed, ITC estimates that if all liberalized tariffs, there is an untapped intra-African export potential of $22 billion. We, however, understand, realize, without practical measures to support African businesses to take advantage of preferential market access under the agreement. African market opportunities. This is why ITC has joined forces with the AfCFTA Secretariat to change operation last year. The AfCFTA must be known not just by large companies like Dangote and Ethiopian Airlines, but also by Africa's SMEs, including those owned by women and youth, and those operating informally. Second, the delivery of certified training workshops on how to export with the AfCFTA. Just like any other trade agreement, the AfCFTA will not yield the desired effect if its advantages and rules and procedures are not understood by SMEs. Third, the undertaking of a private sector mapping to provide a detailed analysis of the characteristics and competitiveness of firms and business support organizations across Africa. And this will serve as an important reference for targeting implementation of the Secretariat's private sector engagement strategy. Fourth, the development of a glossary to explain complicated terms contained in the agreement using simple language and relatable examples. This glossary was launched in November at the AU Industrialization Week in Niamey and is expected to equip MSMEs to better understand and utilize AfCFTA provisions. And then fifth, the organization of workshops to support BSOs to adapt to the new AfCFTA context. African SMEs benefit when the institutions within Africa's business ecosystems are strengthened to deliver relevant services and advocate for their interests. And this is why we're organizing this BSO engagement today. Regional and continental BSOs have a key role to play in making the AfCFTA a success. We've designed the agenda to ensure that you leave this session with increased awareness of the AfCFTA Secretariat's work, progress, operational tools and plans, and an understanding on how your institution can best support SMEs to benefit from the AfCFTA. We hope that this will offer a platform for you also to connect, coordinate, and collaborate with other BSOs, as well as share best practices across regions. A key component of this engagement is the AfCFTA BSO survey, which we have designed to gain a better understanding of your needs, gaps, and priorities in the context of executing your mandate in the new world with the AfCFTA. And my colleagues will present the purpose and scope of the survey today. I encourage you all to take this survey. It's in your best interest, since the findings will be used to inform the AfCFTA Secretariat's future engagement strategy for BSOs as part of its broader AfCFTA private sector engagement plan. Now is your time to make sure that BSO interests have a place at the table. This is your opportunity to guide us and also influence a framework to benefit your many members. Let me conclude by emphasizing that this collaborative effort between ITC and the AfCFTA Secretariat is just the start of an impactful journey to engage and empower regional and continental BSOs to coordinate and deliver relevant and tailored services to support Africa's businesses to traverse the AfCFTA. Together, we can make the AfCFTA a reality. I wish you all the best for this engagement session. Thank you. So, those were the remarks from Ms. Diallo, and I think you've heard enough of me for now. So let's now move to the AfCFTA Secretariat. So we'll now be hearing opening remarks from Mr. Muhannad Hassan Musa Youssef, Head of Division on Strategic Planning, Resource Mobilization and Partnerships for the Directorate of Institutional Matters and Programme Coordination at the Secretariat. The floor is yours, Muhannad.
Good morning, Lily, and good morning, and indeed good afternoon, wherever you may be, colleagues. I am trying to start the video, but perhaps the host could allow. In the meantime, I'll give very brief opening remarks. Distinguished guests, it's a privilege to address you today on the significance of the AfCFTA. We're organizing this webinar workshop on AfCFTA engagement with African regional and continental business support organizations to ensure that the private sector mapping accurately reflects the realities and priorities of regional and continental business support organizations in Africa. As we all know, the AfCFTA offers great potential for micro, small, and medium enterprises to grow their business through measures such as reducing tariffs and non-tariff barriers, streamlining custom procedures, promoting electronic commerce, and increasing trade-related regulations transparency. The AfCFTA is an agreement between African countries that aims to promote and expand into African trade. African leaders signed the agreement in March 2018, and it came into effect January 2021. And it currently has reported 54 signatures and 44 ratifications, with Mozambique expected to submit its instrument to the African Union Commission soon. The AfCFTA offers significant opportunities, and as my previous colleague indicated, it covers a market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of over $3 trillion US. It seeks to achieve seamless integration of governments, people, and the private sector to harness the agreement's opportunities. And this webinar is actually indeed proof of our collaboration, increased collaboration with the private sector. The joint mapping of the African private sector by the AfCFTA Secretariat is key in the collaboration. It will profile firms and BSOs across the continent, provide insights into firm competitiveness, constraints, and the performance and connectivity of the business ecosystem. The economic opportunities that the AfCFTA brings cannot be underestimated or understated. It is therefore crucial for countries to create provisions within the national plans for the agreement's implementation and bring relevant stakeholders, especially the private sector, women and youth, and other relevant ministries to make this one African market work. This webinar that we are organizing is to ensure that the private sector mapping accurately reflects the priorities of regional continental BSOs in Africa, and as such, we encourage your active participation, as ultimately it will inform the design of an AfCFTA engagement strategy and platform for BSOs. In conclusion, I call upon us all to embrace this opportunity to collaborate and support the growth of African businesses through the AfCFTA. Thank you. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much for those inspiring opening remarks from the AfCFTA Secretariat, and I hope that's got you all very eager for what's to come in the remainings of this engagement exercise. So we can now move to the information sharing presentations. We will have two segments of presentations today. The first will be led by the AfCFTA Secretariat, and the second will be led by ITC. Now, I really hope that this will be an information sharing that's two-sided. So we will be sharing updates from our side, but we also want to hear from you. So following each of the segments, we will open the floor for comments, for questions based on what you've heard, but also to hear from you as to whether you have any updates to share with us. Do you like the sound of what you've heard? And how would you like to be engaged in the AfCFTA process? So we will take specific questions as we go. And then at the end of the engagement, we will have a broader open discussion and Q&A where you can raise more general questions relating to the AfCFTA and the private sector and the activities of ITC and the Secretariat, and also engage online with peers from across the continent. So the first presentation, which will be delivered by the AfCFTA Secretariat, will be divided into three single presentations. So we have three expert presenters for this session who will share information on the current state of AfCFTA negotiations, the AfCFTA Guided Trade Initiative, which is an exciting new scheme of the Secretariat to support meaningfully commercial trade under the agreement, and then also the AfCFTA Private Sector Engagement Plan, which has a critical space and home for BSO engagement. So without further ado, the first presentation on the AfCFTA State of Play will also be presented by Mohanad. So over to you, Mohanad.
Thank you very much. And again, I have the pleasure of taking you through, in about 15 minutes or so, the AfCFTA agreement. My presentation will focus on the following. I will give you an overview of the agreement, where we stand with this present status of negotiations, some of the operational instruments that we have, the institutional framework under which we fall, and speak a bit about trade facilitation, the Abidjan-Lagos corridor, and a brief conclusion remarks. With regards to the AfCFTA, it's a flagship project under the African Union Agenda 2063, which is the African Union's 50-year development plan. And it has 12 flagship projects, the AfCFTA being one of them. It seeks to create a single continental market for goods and services vis-a-vis expanding intra-African trade across the continent and REX. It seeks to promote and attain sustainable and inclusive development, gender parity, structural transformation of the AfCFTA state parties. It's in fact the only agreement in the world that has provisions for women and youth in trade. It promotes sustainable development, regional value chains, agriculture and food security, and it enhances the competitiveness of African economies and are ECAS for the central region, ECOWAS for the western region, EAC for the eastern region, SADC for the southern region, COMESA, Arab Maghreb Union for the northern region, CENSAD and IGAD for the eastern region. It lays also or eventually a continental customs union. When it's implemented, there's four things that we expect it to achieve. The first is to enhance five countries with 1.3 billion and a combined GDP of 3.4. Export growth, the World Bank expects that by 2035, the volume of total exports will increase by 29% relative to business as usual. It'll provide shared prosperity and poverty reduction. We account as a continent for just 2.4% of the global GDP and only 2% of global trade. But yet we account for a very large amount of global resources. It also provides welfare gains. UNCTAD estimates that the AfCFTA will result in total welfare gains of about 16 to 24 billion, which will increase employment by approximately 1.4% or GDP by 0.97% on immediate operationalization. Other gains will, of course, be gained over time. Some of the other opportunities that are there, where we presently stand in terms of negotiations. The agreement is structured along two phases, to be implemented on two phases. The first is to finalize protocols on trade in goods, trade in services, as well as rules and procedures on the settlement of disputes. Now, the first phase were concluded prior to adoption and entered into effect on the 30th of May, 2019. The remaining protocols on the phase two, which are investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, digital trade / e-commerce, and women and youth in trade. Investment, competition policy, and intellectual property rights are finalized and expected to be adopted actually this Sunday in the AU Assembly. The groundwork is done. The remaining two are on digital trade and women and youth in trade. And we have clear instructions as a secretariat to finalize negotiations among the member states on those by June this year. So we're very well on the way in terms of finalizing these two. Phase one and what's contained within some of these protocols. Again, apologies for some of the terminology. This will be detailed, and as my colleague indicated, we have a glossary that will help perhaps disseminate these. But on the phase one protocol in trade in goods, there's 9 annexes, okay? Of which the first is trade concessions, rules, tariff concessions, rules of origin, customs cooperation, and M&A, trade facilitation, non-tariff barriers, technical barriers to trade, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, trade remedies, and 3 appendices: certificate of origin, origin declaration, suppliers and product producers declaration. On the trade in services, there's specific annexes, specific commitments, M&F exemptions, the priority sectors, framework document on regulatory cooperation, and the protocol on the rules and procedures for settlement disputes basically outlines working procedures for the panel, the expert review, and code of conduct for arbitrators and panelists. And the remaining ones are, as I indicated, investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, which are finalized. The remaining are digital trade and women and youth in trade. The overview, what does the protocol on TIG, trading goods, entail? In essence, what the objective is of this protocol, it's the meat of the matter basically, is to create a liberalized market for trading goods in accordance with Article 3 of the agreement. Article 3 of the agreement basically outlines the general objectives of the agreement, which are to have a single African market. The specific objective of this protocol is to boost inter-African trade in goods through 6 points. First, progressive elimination of tariffs, progressive elimination of non-tariff barriers, 3, enhanced efficiency of customs procedures, trade facilitation and transit, 4, enhance cooperation in the areas of technical barriers to trade and sanitary and phytosanitary measures. 5, development and promotion of regional and continental value chains. And 6, enhance socioeconomic development, diversification, and industrialization. There's 5, that's for protocol in trade and services. For trading goods, for trade and services, there's 5 priority areas that are targeted. Professional services, information and communication services, financial services, tourism services, and transport services. 5 priority sectors with their encompassing subsectors that line value addition sectors as well. Where we stand with the trade and services negotiations, 47 countries have so far submitted the initial service offers. We've conducted technical verification to ensure that those offers are in line with adopted modalities. 5 schedules of specific commitments were approved by the Council of Ministers. Apologies for the infographic there. And 5 subcommittees of trade in services were established. We've also outlined guiding principles for negotiating regulatory frameworks, and we'll now begin negotiating with sectoral and cross-cutting regulatory frameworks. And outstanding issues remain on the remaining service sectors. On rules and procedures on the settlement of disputes, a very important preamble and protocol. Of course, all of this is linchpinned on having an effective dispute settlement mechanism. So the AfCFTA agreement has a protocol on the rules and procedures on settlement of disputes. It refers to the resolution of disputes and provides clear rules on dispute resolution and guidelines within specific timeframes. It's along the lines of the WTO, but is bound by rules in order to ensure that trade is conducted under transparent rules, but was negotiated by the member states themselves and actually has provisions more stringent or specific action as opposed to the WTO. By including provisions for consultations and mediations. And disputes can be initiated through any of the trading parties, done by member states. Adjunction is done by panels and an appellate body with clear timeframes. A final report is submitted to member states for consideration. And in all actuality, it is actually stronger than what is provided for by some of the regional blocs, such as SADC or COMESTA. Where we stand with regards to signatures and ratification, as of January this year, all member states except Eritrea had signed the agreement. So that's 54 out of 55. Signature is one thing, ratification is another, which is a step towards making the treaty enforceable at the national levels. We have 44 ratifications. You have the list there. We're expecting the 45th, Mozambique, which is expected to deposit its instrument of ratification within the AUC, hopefully by this week. And 10 countries are yet to ratify. Those who have ratified, who have signed and then ratified, domesticated the agreement to become what we refer to as the state parties to the agreement, with all the benefits entailed therein as outlined in the agreement. Our operational instruments are as follows. We have a guided trade initiative, which last year we channeled across our member states from Kenya all the way to Ghana. And it basically was a pilot for us to both advocate and communicate the benefits of the initiative, further outreach of the benefits of the initiative to the private sector and citizens. And it was a successful initiative. We'll be conducting the same this year via a guided trade in services initiative. And so the ambition now is to do the same, but for services. It went very well. We also have the Intra-African Trade Fair 2023. I'll talk a bit about that in the next slide. We have the Rules of Origin Manual. We have the non-tariff barriers reporting and monitoring and elimination mechanism, the e-tariff book, the Pan-African payment and settlement system. And I'll speak a bit about some of these in the next slides. So guided trade initiative basically seeks to facilitate meaningful trading among state parties that have met to the minimum requirements for trade under the agreement. It tests operational, institutional, and legal policy instruments, allows commercially meaningful trade, and sends a positive message to Africa's economic operators about the veracity of the AfCFTA. Please see the link below. Of course, we will share this presentation, but it will give you a bit more as to what is the African AfCFTA Guided Trade Initiative. But just to allow for conversations, I will go into the next instruments. The e-tariff book is part of the digitalization and trade facilitation journey of the Secretariat. It basically includes the rules of origin and the customs procedures applicable to each product traded under the AfCFTA, and it allows traders to identify their products with the product-specific rules of origin and customs procedures that is necessary to fulfill an order that they can qualify for preferential trade under the CFTA. The link is there, au-afcfta.org. It's our general website, au-afcfta.org, and backstroke e-tariff is where you'll find the e-tariff book. Again, we will share this. The rule regime governing the conditions under which a product or service can be traded duty-free across the region. 88.03% of the tariff lines are what remains are automotive industry, textiles, and issues pertaining to special economic zones. The manual sets out specific guidelines on the application of the rules issued in determining the origin status of goods, procedures of administrating the rules, and the institutional framework for the rules of origin. Investment show convened by the African Commission, the Secretariat, and the Flexim Bank, with the maiden edition held in Cairo, Egypt 2020. The 1,161 exhibitors, which exceeded the target of 1,100. The third edition, ladies and gentlemen, is scheduled for November this year, 21st to the 23rd, 21st to the 23rd of November in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. And please see the link to www.intraafricantradefair.com for more instructions and details on that. The Pan-African Payment System, very, very important initiative. It was launched on the 12th Extraordinary Session in Niamey in 2019. But actual commercial launch was on the 12th of January. Right now, it focuses on the West African Monetary Zone, with the first concluded transaction done in October 2022. We will increase its rollout this year to the other regions, and we intend to save over 5 billion annually due to foreign exchange losses via the promotion of use of African currencies in trade. It's a bit miss of us to use a third party currency when you have two African parties trading in goods, in a lot of cases neighboring amongst each other. So this Pan-African payment system will strive to reduce that currency loss and that currency exchange fluctuation. The link is papss.com. The adjustment facility, we are aware that there's going to be a lot of challenges in terms of short-term negative impact on liberalization of trade. So this fund seeks to offset that loss, specifically amongst the state parties. It will consist of a base fund, of a general fund, and a credit fund. Base fund contributions from state parties, general fund is concessional, and credit is to provide commercial funding to both public and private sectors, enabling them to adjust and take advantage. We've received the commitments from a Frexim Bank relating to the management of the fund, and we will soon be operationalizing that as well to help offset some of the losses in trading. The business forum focuses on following value chains: agro-processing, automotive, pharmaceuticals, transportation and logistics, as well as digital trade. It will create awareness amongst the African community, African business community, who are seeking a bit of avenues for government and the private sector engagement, as well as promotion of business-friendly environment for SMEs. The non-tariff barriers portal, I will, sorry, the slides are from a previous engagement. I will share the link with regards to the non-tariff barriers portal on the chat, but it serves as a reporting, monitoring, and elimination mechanism. Basically, includes contact details at the member states for private sector to file complaints on specific trade obstacles that they have faced, and we monitor this portal daily. Again, I'll share the slide, the link on the chat as well. The Africa Trade Observatory contains trade information. It monitors the pace of trade at a macro level, and it helps on the implementation and impact of the agreement. The link is ato.africa, ato.africa. Now, on the institutional framework pertaining to the AfCFTA as a whole, I'll focus on this slide and won't get into the details of the next in the interest of time, but it's on 4 levels. We are, if you would look from the bottom up, the Secretariat reports to the STOs, and then the Council of Ministers, and finally the Assembly. These are referenced in Articles 13, 12, 11, and 10. We serve basically as the coordinating, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating body of the agreement across the state parties, private sector, the RECs. And we basically serve to convene meetings, monitor the implementation process, and perform specific functions as provided to us by the Committee, Council of Ministers, and STOs. We have entered into partnerships with technical and financial partners in our discharge of our mandate. And to that end, we are the key linchpin, basically, in terms of operationalizing the agreement. I won't bore you too much with the institutional framework. This should serve as a Q&A. I want to give you an overview of some of the trade corridors that we have presently. And I'll speak of the Abidjan-Lagos trade corridor, which, as you see here, geographically links via road Abidjan all the way to Lagos, this link. The FCFTA will implement the trade facilitation measures using a corridor approach. Abidjan-Lagos will be a pilot. Work has already been undertaken to identify the nature of the corridor and the possible areas of intervention, for example, on interconnectivity, harmonization of procedures, transit usage, etc. We've employed a benchmarking and learning experience from other corridors. And we've noted that there are some NTBs, non-tariff barriers, let's say, across or along this corridor, and we're working to alleviate this corridor. There are other corridors that we have identified, and work will also be commenting on those. This purpose, of course, is to be to highlight both for us what are some of the challenges in terms of these corridors, but also promote their use. Conclusion. I gave an overview of some of the agreements, the protocols, and the annexes. Gave you an overview of the guided trade initiative. But in essence, what we want to emphasize basically is to really encourage you to ask as many questions as you can. For more information that you may need on some of the specific technical details, the website is there on the slides in front of you. Once again, thanks so much, and apologies, moderator, I've taken over a few minutes. It's a bit hard to speak on everything in less than that. Merci.
Thank you, Mohamed. And no, you've provided a very comprehensive overview of what the AfCFTA is, and I think that's important. We've also heard on the status of negotiation, the AfCFTA instruments, and the expected benefits. And I think I particularly noted down the reference you made to the World Bank projection that by 2035, the volume of exports is expected to increase by 29% under the AfCFTA. And I think you also mentioned at the previous intra-African trade fair, 42.1 billion US dollars in trade and investment deals were made. So I think it's really undeniable that the potential for intra-African trade and business is huge, and it's just waiting to be tapped by Africa's business community. And this is why BSOs are really needed to support SMEs to tap into these gains. And I think this moves us very well to the focus of the next presentation, which is focused more around implementation and the AfCFTA guided trade initiative. I think there's now 8 countries under the initiative that are now showing us that what was once thought impossible by skeptics is possible, and trade is taking place under the AfCFTA. So it's a very exciting time. But what exactly is the AfCFTA guided trade initiative, and what has it achieved so far, and what are the next steps? So we'll now have a presentation from Mr. Augustine Belixdun Kidisil, who works in the Trade in Goods and Competition section of the AfCFTA Secretariat. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good day. So, as Mohamed said, one of the flagship projects of the Secretariat is the Guided Trade Initiative. And the objective of the initiative is basically to get the private sector to assume ownership of the AfCFTA. It started as an initiative that His Excellency the Secretary General proposed to the Council of Ministers in July last year, and it was enthusiastically received because the state parties or member states recognized the need to encourage private sector involvement and engagement with the AfCFTA legal instruments. And so the initial state parties who took part in the pilot phase were 7 state parties, and were Cameroon, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Rwanda, and Tanzania. The GTI process was coordinated by a committee called the GTI, the Committee on the AfCFTA GTI. That's the bigger committee. The committee had subcommittees on customs and logistics, and then there was even one on services. Now, the objective of the GTI was, one, to demonstrate the efficiency of the legal framework, to put the legal instruments of the AfCFTA to the test, to try to see whether it really works and how efficiently it's going to work. Number 2, we wanted to obtain feedback from the participants to see where we needed or require areas of improvement. And so the ultimate objective was also to test the readiness of the private sector to participate in the AfCFTA. So we didn't want it to be something that was left to state parties to discuss at meetings and to reach agreements and all that without practicalizing it. So the GTI was to test the readiness of the African market for the AfCFTA legal instruments. And so in terms of roadmap, what we will be like the focal committees for the GTI initiative. And then the secretary will help to coordinate these various committees. In the various committees, we get businesses involved, suppliers, manufacturers, and buyers around the continent. And then we encourage actors in trading, in this case, customs officials and state authorities involved in sanitary and phytosanitary requirements. All these things without logistics lines to get involved in the process. So the GTI was launched on 7th October 2022, and as at the time of launch, we had 14 companies with about 40 trades from Ghana interested, 27 companies from Kenya, 7 companies from Egypt, and then Mauritius, we had about 25 potential trades. So in all, we had about 100 or more potential trades, ranging from ceramics to tea and all that. This demonstrated the interest that the private sector really has in being part of the AfCFTA. And for us, that was a huge relief, and at the same time, an indication of the potential that this framework has for African SMEs. So what are the lessons we learned from this? One was that we realized that the trading instruments negotiated, drafted under the AfCFTA were actually fit for purpose and were ready to be used. And 2, it was necessary to have national coordinating offices to guide the initial trading under the AfCFTA. So setting up national ad hoc committees was a good idea. 3, we realized that logistics was a nightmare, it was a big problem. Sometimes the cost of it and even finding the right people to move the products from one state party to the other was a challenge. And so what we learned from all of these challenges was that we needed the participation of the private sector. So we needed more private sector engagement. And so engagements like this are engagements that we welcome, engagements that we believe would help, not just in the promotion of the GTI, but ultimately the realization of the objective of the AfCFTA market. So the GTI played an important role in facilitating discussions among state parties. That is true, but the realization is that we can't leave that to just state parties. And so state parties are encouraged to mobilize the private sector to get involved so that ownership of the entire AfCFTA project will move from state parties as regulators to the private sector as the actual participants. So the state parties will play facilitating roles in the process. And so we realized that in order to achieve that, we needed to have in place aggregators, the need for trade aggregators on the continent. And these aggregators will resolve some of the challenges that we recognized in the pilot phase of the GTI. Information was a big issue because we're looking at SMEs, smallholder farmers expressing interest in participating in this big market, and they don't know how to go about it. As individuals, they don't have the capacity, the financial resources to do that. So we realized that one of the ways of getting all these smaller businesses and smallholder farmers involved was to eventually have aggregators, trade aggregators on the continent. Now, in terms of the way forward, GTI will continue to expand. Since the launch of the GTI, other state parties have expressed interest. We keep receiving inquiries from companies around the continent wanting to know how to be part of the GTI, who to contact even in their own countries, and how to go about the process. So that is a good thing. This year, the Directorate will be embarking on a number of missions dedicated to GTI. We'll be going to, starting with the current state parties to the GTI initiative and eventually expand it to the rest of the AU membership. And the idea is to get closer to the private sector participants through these engagements. Key part of our targets this year will be to expand the GTI, not just in terms of countries, but to eventually encourage the setting up of AfCFTA trading companies. And this is derived from what we really know about export trading companies. Thankfully, in November last year, the heads of states and government recognized the need for aggregators or trading companies, and therefore directed the Secretariat to work with state parties to move the GTI a step further by encouraging the setting up of trading aggregating companies on the continent. So the Secretariat has worked on a concept paper on how the trading companies should look like. And we are happy to say that there's even a company in Ghana, the first that we're aware of, that has been specifically set up to do this, to be a trade aggregating company for Ghana and then within the West African sub-region. So that's a company that we're hoping to look up to as a model for other companies around the continent who are interested in being aggregators. So in terms of the structure, what kind of entities are we looking at if we want to have AfCFTA trading companies? The Afrexim Bank has been doing a lot of work on export trading companies. They've done a lot of research in the area, and they have a lot of options in terms of legal structure that those companies should have. Now, considering the directive of the heads of states and government and the need for African SMEs to own this project, the Secretariat is proposing that in terms of legal structure, trading companies can be or should be private sector led. So you have private sector ownership. Of course, it doesn't mean that it has to be 100% private sector owned. You can have a PPP venture where private sector partners with government. But what we don't want is to have a situation where we're repeating the inefficiencies of the old and existing export trading companies, which were mainly owned by states. So we want private sector to be involved. Not just involvement of private sector, but in terms of nationality ownership, we want it to be African. We want to have African ownership. And most importantly, the objective of these trading companies should be to serve as aggregators. And this is important because SMEs are the biggest businesses we have on the continent. They create the highest number of jobs on the continent, and yet they face the biggest challenges in terms of information asymmetry, in terms of resources and market access. If you have in place trading companies, they can then rally around these trading companies to build their capacities and to be able to access other markets on the continent. So this is the next phase for the GTI. It's still the beginning stages. We are discussing with state parties, and throughout this year, we'll be engaging with private sector across the continent to whip up interest in the setting up of African trading companies and to even go on the road with some of the companies who are already set up as Africa trading companies to serve as models to other businesses on the continent. So briefly, this is the GTI and where we are heading this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Augustine, for this extremely interesting presentation on the very practical measures taken by the AfCFTA Secretariat to connect and equip businesses to really create intra-African trade. And I think you highlighted the role of private sector engagement in the AfCFTA Guided Trade Initiative, and that the goal for this year is to get closer to the private sector and set up these AfCFTA trading companies as aggregators. And the next presentation will really focus specifically on this. components, which is private sector engagement. Following this final presentation from the AfCFTA Secretariat, we will have a brief round of Q&A. So in advance, I ask you to post any questions you may have in the chat box. And if you wish to speak and have your voice heard in literal terms, I guess, please do raise your hand. And when the time comes, you will be added to the panel to deliver your question. But please do keep your questions brief, clear, and concise. Okay, so the final presentation will be delivered by Cynthia Nasingbe Esanam, who is the Senior Advisor to the Secretary General on Private Sector Engagement at the AfCFTA Secretariat. Over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Lily, and good morning, good afternoon to the distinguished participants who have made the time to join us today at this important conversation. We are very happy to see you all, and we hope that all the presentations that have been shared so far are instructive, and that we will be able to deliver the most out of it. So I will go on and present my presentation, which will talk about the private sector engagement. I don't think it's important again to go through the needs, to explain again the need for engaging the private sector. We understand that the private sector is the driver of the AfCFTA, the driver of trade and investments, and we will need to have the private sector with us at all times if we want to deliver on our mandate. I'm trying to move my slides, and I don't know why it's not moving. Give me 1 second. Okay. That's right. So the importance of and the role of the private sector, cannot be overestimated. So we are estimated. We know we have to really engage the private sector and get the private sector to own the AfCFTA if we really want to deliver on our mandates. And we all know the statistics by the UNICA in terms of the impact of the private sector, and especially the SMEs, the young and the women entrepreneurs, who make up more than 90% of our private sector. So it's really important that in our engagement through the negotiations of the AfCFTA, but most importantly, during the implementation phase, that we really get the private sector to own the AfCFTA and be engaged so that we can really get the deliver on our mandate. So what we really want to do is to develop a pragmatic approach to mobilize private sector support and participation in the AfCFTA implementation process and activate its role as the key driver of trade and investment on the continent. This is the general that we have also outlined. I'm really sorry. I don't know why my computer. Lily, do you see the screen on slide share, or you see it on?
We can see your slides. So we can see the slide that's open, but also
is it on slide share?
No.
Okay. Engagement strategy. So first of all, we want to ensure that there is a thorough understanding of the AfCFTA agreement by the African business community and relevant stakeholders, and we want to really get to, the business sector to own it and participate in its implementation. And this will be done through the various sensitizations, activities, awareness raising activities that we will be rolling out on the continent this year and the years to come, so that we get our stakeholders, our business communities to understand where we are at in terms of the implementation of the agreement, but also what are the opportunities that the AfCFTA agreement presents to the private sector and how the private sector can seize those opportunities. So that will be our first specific objective. The second one will be to mobilize and facilitate private sector investments in key trade-related sectors, as well as in priority value chains. And I will speak about the priority value chains in the next slide. The third one will be to facilitate private-public dialogue to ensure advocacy that reflects all parties' interests and encourage stakeholders to not only align with best practices, but also undertake reforms conducive to the attainment of the AfCFTA objectives. We know that the implementation of the AfCFTA is not going to be an easy road, as there is a lot of hurdles, obstacles that needs to be addressed. It's an overarching agreement that covers many sectors, and we will need to make sure that the ecosystem is ready for also disagreement to be fully implemented and for the private sector to take benefit of it. So public-private dialogue will be key, and we will we will always make sure that we get activities around policy dialogue so that the public policies are aligned with the private sector needs in order for us to see the benefits of this agreement. The fourth specific objective we see is really to educate the SMEs on what AfCFTA means practically to them and how it relates to their business activities, and improve their competitiveness and operational capabilities through skills development in trade and targeted support program. And this obviously will be done with partners such as the International Trade Center, with whom we have an MOU, and we hope that obviously this specific objective is really going to be about capacitating the SMEs, getting them ready to access the AfCFTA markets so that we can see the volumes that we want to see trades on the continent. And you've heard the presentation on the guided trade initiative, which we were happy to see that most of the enterprises that participated in this guided trade initiative were all SMEs. Even we saw a product coming from Rwanda to Ghana, and this and tea also from Kenya, from smallholder farmers. And these are the type of inclusivity that we want to see, because as we always say, the AfCFTA should not only benefit the big firms, the large corporates, etc., but also it should be beneficial, most importantly, to our small and medium enterprises, our women and young entrepreneurs. So we would want to continue working on with our partners to support the MSMEs, get them ready, provide information in terms of access to markets, leverage on the gains of the guided trade initiative, which this year is going also to be expanded to cover more countries. The fifth specific objective will be to establish a private sector-led engagement platform within the Secretariat for a structured and optimal engagement with the Secretariat. We have to keep the dialogue going with the private sector. We have to make sure that as we go through, we make the journey together, that we get the we have a mechanism that allow the Secretariat to get feedback from the private sector, and that mechanism also will allow the AfCFTA to really deliver on its mandate, as I said, in terms of communication, sharing information. So this is something that we will want to push for and have established this year. And we hope that through the private sector mapping exercise that we are doing with the International Trade Center, and also the engagement that we will have on various platforms, be it the AfYEF in November or the Business Forum that is coming up soon in April, we will be able to structure such a platform within the Secretariat for continuous engagement with the private sector. We are open for recommendations, for suggestions, etc. And we hope that by the end of this session, we will have, be able to have your feedback as to how you think that the private sector should engage with you as BSOs, business councils, etc. Obviously, the mobilization of resources is very important if we want to implement